Now, what I've learned, my goodness, lots of things, um, lots of important lessons. I think one of the most important ones is I went into it thinking, it'll be fun, it'll be cute, it'll be easy. Yeah, no. I think entrepreneurship, or just founding your own thing is actually really hard. And the initial stages are always, the first few months is always really fun because it's a baby stage, right? You're just enjoying yourself, you're brainstorming, but then things get serious and the challenges are appearing suddenly out of nowhere. And I think that's where it really begins. That self-awareness needs to be there. And I think this is actually a very good point, therapy or any form of self-help, something where you are aware of your triggers, you're aware of your patterns, childhood stuff, all of that plays into being a leader. And I think I always used to say this, and I always say this, if you're not okay, how do you expect your organization to be okay?
How confident are you of your leadership knowledge, your leadership skills? Pretty sure you know what you're doing? Or is it like alchemy or witchcraft to you? Now that's a pretty tenuous link, I will admit, but today's guest is Emma Gabor, who's had an interesting and varied career so far, including starting her own non-profit at a relatively young age, whilst still in the midst of her academic studies, doing a bachelor's in art history. She then went on to do a master's focusing on early modern history, witchcraft, alchemy, magic, and some pretty interesting subjects and lessons come out of all of that alone. But then also at the same time, in parallel to all of this, Emma continued to manage that non-profit. So she's got some valuable leadership lessons and insights from that experience. And of course, I couldn't resist talking about some of the history and the witchcraft and the magic as well. Hence that rather clumsy link I made at the beginning of this intro.
Welcome to the Leading with Integrity podcast. Leadership talk for the modern manager. With your host, David Hatch.
Emma, welcome to Leading with Integrity. Lovely to have you on the show.
Thank you very much for having me. It's an honor.
Best place to start, as always, is over to you, really. Tell the listeners a bit about yourself, your background, your career so far, and what you get up to today.
Okay, I'm just going to go from the top of my head. I had to write so many of these for our websites and everything, so I just have a whole paragraph in front of me right now. So basically, I was born in Budapest, and then I grew up in Vienna. And after graduating high school here, I ended up in London studying art history at UCL. And while I was there, I had this crazy idea to found a nonprofit organization, which I began in my last year. And then I took a gap year to build that. And that's today known as the Salon de la Sagesse, which is sort of the salon of wisdom. And we now have 2 daughter organizations as well. And then I ended up doing my master's in the Netherlands, and that was in heritage, culture, all this fun stuff. And I graduated last year, and I'm still working on the nonprofit. So we basically do events for our members, as well as open events around culture, science, anything that's pertinent, anything that's interesting, anything that's really vital to discuss in our societies today. So that's the mother organization. And then we have a daughter organization that recently we closed down. That was an online seasonal publication called Le Journal d'Ambroisie, where we published in about 8 categories. And we had writers and authors from all over the world, so that was wonderful. We built a very nice community, and we also have our other daughter organization, which is the ACMC, the Arts and Cultural Management Conference. And so that happens every year for about 3-4 days in Vienna. and we have presentations, workshops, everything around that subject. So academically, I specialized in the early modern period, specifically alchemy, magic, witches, the fun stuff. And so at the moment, I'm actually sort of in between jobs and things. I am going to be retiring soon from the nonprofit organization. This is still not completely public news, but it will be soon. And I'm looking into PhDs around the subject of early modern witches, as well as working on my debut novel. So that's me. Hope that wasn't too long.
Not at all. If anything, it was probably too short for all of the different things that you just mentioned. I feel like we should get into some of those in a bit more detail because there's some really interesting stuff there. So to start with, for those who don't know, when we say early modern, what time period are we talking about in history?
It's mostly the 16th and 17th centuries. Those are the most, I mean, as a historian, the most interesting and the most exciting, I think.
Yeah. So not like the 1950s then, which is what most people these days would think of as early modern.
We're going backwards, yeah.
Okay, interesting. And what drew you to I guess, well, the alchemy, the magic, the witchcraft side of it?
I think what really fascinated me about that period is that it was such a transitionary period. That's, just preceding the scientific revolution, the Enlightenment, all this stuff. And so it was a very rich period full of experiments. Alchemy, as we know it, combines material practices, but also spiritual practices. So it was a very rich subject. And magic, I think, fascinates everyone. And so, when I realized, there were actually people practicing what we now call magic, I wanted to know all about it. And that's where the witches came from.
It feels like there's quite a lot of misconceptions around all of these things. So, I mean, for a start, I mean, you've talked about three things there already. To a lot of people, those get lumped together. But I'm assuming there's different words for them for a reason, and there are distinct differences. So, I mean, what are those differences, and why do you think those are important?
I think here we can distinguish. When I say I specialize in the early modern period, actually for my MA thesis, I compared the early modern practices of witches with contemporary witches that are existing. So I think that's an important thing to say. In terms of, I would say, magic and what it entails, I think we have this idea of magic that is so prevalent in our societies of, it must be a witch with a big pointy hat, holding a wand, riding a broom. That's not it at all. It's mostly really herbal medicine. So that's one of the main sort of practices. It's some astrology, especially in the early modern period. Magic was understood as something that couldn't go without astrology, or at least an understanding of it. I think nowadays that remained, but also somewhat changed. And also in the early modern period, a lot of magic and a lot of spells, a lot of incantations were tied to the Bible, Christianity, certain, belief systems. So I think those are very interesting. Nowadays, it's a bit different. So I think today a lot has changed. First of all, one misconception is that witchcraft today is non-existent, or it's existing only in very specific areas. I think we all know about, witchcraft in Africa, which is a very specific kind of, I would say quite often dark magic. But actually recently, in the past decade, there has been a huge revival of witchcraft in the Western world. There's even a phenomena called witch talk. I don't know if you've heard about it. So there's TikTok and then there's witch talk. So witches have overtaken TikTok. And let me tell you, there's over 30 billion views on Witch Talk. Of all the videos, of all the practices, over 30 billion views in the world. So it is huge, and there are lots of practicing witches everywhere. And so I think that's very important to acknowledge and understand, that it's actually not just a niche little world, but it's more and more popular.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty big.
Feed is now going to be full of that because we've mentioned it and
right.
the algorithms heard us. So, yeah.
No, I really urge you to look into it because it's so interesting. So many different spells and so many different points of views, and just, yeah, really cool stuff. But yeah, what I would say inherently what witchcraft is tied to, I think, in the early modern period, also nowadays, is nature. So I think, aside from all the misconceptions, the most important thing to remember is that nature is what makes a witch a witch. That relationship, that closely knit sort of understanding of, okay, I'm going to live respectfully within nature. I'm going to take what I need, but only what I need. I'm going to use that. Yes.
Particularly interesting, and perhaps I'm showing my own ignorance of this period of history, but the connection to Christianity, I was totally unaware of. So and maybe this reflects the way we're educated about history in this part of the world as well. But my understanding was that those two were very much at odds, and one attempted to eradicate the other.
So they somewhat were. That's the very interesting paradoxical thing is they were on some level. There was a distinction made between dark magic, light magic. There was a distinction made between witches who were thought to be, closely working with the devil, for instance, which was very much hunted by the Inquisition, and witches who weren't. But eventually those lines blurred. And so it was really hard to separate the two. But at its essence, at its high point, I want to say, I think that was in the 17th century, at its high point, witchcraft was very much taking some inspiration. It had to, because those societies were Christian societies. So there was a very interesting relationship there, yeah.
And I mean, what was the line, or who made the decision about what was light and what was dark when it came to that?
Well, so it began with the Inquisition, and it began with them sort of saying, okay, here we go, let's murder some women, right? But there was a lot of my argument, right? So this is a historian's sort of debate. My belief is that there was so much turmoil societally. There were so many upheavals, wars, transformations, that the locals also ended up finding it easier to turn against their neighbors and, accuse people of witchcraft as a form of almost, I don't know, just letting the tensions go, I guess. So it became a very localized thing in the end. And that was actually very scary when you think, your neighbor who you trust from one day to next can just turn against you. Now, what's also very important to mention, I think, is that ultimately the witch hunts weren't witch hunts, they were women hunts. So I think that, and I mean, I could talk about that for hours, but I think that's a very important, thing to remember.
Yeah. So, I mean, not to preempt my next question, but that feels like, I mean, if you take the word witchcraft out of it, and you could almost replace women with any other minority group, couldn't you? I mean, they're not a minority group in case women are. That's 50% of the population. But anyway, that is a sad recurring theme throughout history, even more recently. And I don't know if there's a lesson in there about human nature, maybe. I don't know if we've got time to get into that, but...
Certainly about the patriarchy, there's a lesson there, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, that feeds into the next question, really, which is, I mean, there's a famous quote, isn't there? I can't remember who it was. I think it's quite often misattributed to Churchill, but I don't think he said it first, which is about if you fail to learn the lessons of history, you're doomed to repeat the mistakes. So what do you think is, in this context at least, the biggest lesson that we've forgotten from history in the modern time, and what do you think we might be perhaps doomed to repeat, if I haven't already said it just now?
Lots of things, unfortunately, I think we'll repeat until we learn a lesson.
What's the most interesting one then, do you think?
I want to look at it from a very general perspective because I think that's the most, I guess, useful. I think if you look back at history, it's thousands and thousands of years of wars, transitions, change, and cycles. And if we look at it from a spiritual perspective, those cycles are of death and rebirth, meaning something comes to an end and there's a new beginning. There's something new that comes in its stead. And so that, I think, is where we are right now societally. I think there's so much chaos and tragedy and death around us, and we tend to really just sort of stay so gloomy about it, which is completely fair, and we have to because it is gloomy. But I think people tend to lose hope and think that they have no agency, whereas they do. I think that's probably, for me, the biggest lesson is we are about to enter a new period in history. All the signs are pointing to it. This is a new era. That's also with AI, everything. And I think it's important that people understand that they have their place in it and they have their say in it. And to do, even if it's something small, they can have an impact.
Yeah, no, I love that, actually. That's such a good lesson. And I mean, I wouldn't call myself a historian, but the interesting period of history to me has always been like more contemporary history. In fact, when I was doing my bachelor's degree, it was like 50-50 between doing what I chose to do in the end, which was politics and international studies, or history and modern history. But I think that key point there about agency and we can have an impact on the world, even as individuals. I mean, there's plenty of examples in more recent contemporary modern history, even like the last century, where too many people said, well, I'm just one person, there's nothing I can do about it, so I'm going to do nothing. And if even half of the people who thought that had done something or done something differently, how much change could they have realised on history, and how much horrible suffering could have been avoided? So I think that's such an important lesson. And it's a great one for leadership as well, I think, bringing it back to the subject of the podcast. Because, I find history fascinating. I don't know as much about it as you, I'm sure, especially in that period that we've just been talking about. But I could easily talk about this for 2 hours and we could have a whole other podcast about it. But sadly, this one's about leadership. So not sadly, but you know what I mean. So bringing it back to leadership, I think there's a lesson there for anyone who is aspiring to lead as well, because, and I'll tie it to this kind of common myth of leadership, that it's about having that job, that title, that position. Because actually, anyone can lead. It doesn't matter where you are in an org chart. Leadership is an action, it's an activity, it's a practice, it's a behaviour. It's not a title or a position. So there's a nice parallel there. We've tied it together. Great. So on that note, something else from your career history that you mentioned in passing, and you described it as a crazy idea, so I really want to go into that a little bit more. I wouldn't say crazy is the word I would use, but I certainly think it's unusual for final year students to decide, I'm going to go and start an organisation by myself and found a thing. Yeah. Most people are focused on like dissertations and exams and things like that at that point. So tell us a bit more about that. Like, where did the idea come from? What were some of the challenges and lessons that you got from that experience?
Actually, the idea it was very funny. It just popped into my head one day to the next. I was in not a very fun period in my life. And I think subconsciously I was looking for like a creative way out, a way that I could entertain myself and maybe, escape my reality, to put it very bluntly. And so, yeah, I just kind of went for it. It was very, I don't know, it was just a very simple decision. I thought it was a great time. It was also COVID, so we're on lockdown. And so I was like, well, actually, how about a community? Let's build a community. People need it. So it was pretty straightforward, really. Now, what I've learned, my goodness, lots of things. lots of important lessons. I think one of the most important ones is I went into it thinking, it'll be fun, it'll be cute, it'll be easy. Yeah, no. I think entrepreneurship or just founding your own thing is actually really hard. And the initial stages are always, the first few months is always really fun because it's a baby stage, right? You're just enjoying yourself, you're brainstorming, but then things get serious and the challenges are appearing suddenly out of nowhere. And I think that's where it really begins. So I think one lesson is you're either fully in and you're in it, through all the shitty periods, everything, or you're out. I don't think there's an in-between, or maybe if there is, I would love to hear about it, but I haven't experienced that. So I think you really have to ask yourself the question, are you made for it? Are you ready to be literally breathing and living this organization and this vision 24/7 every single day? And if the answer is no, then don't do it. So I think that's one thing. The second lesson is about human connections, which is always the most difficult and the most challenging of all. What I learned over the past 5 years is if your intuition is telling you something's off, believe it and listen to it. Even if someone's resume is absolutely perfect, even if someone seems perfect, at an interview, if your intuition is telling you something's off, it is likely off. I have had so many cases of, conflicts, having to fire people simply because I wasn't listening to my internal voice. And also, I think I just learned so many practical skills and so many problem solving skills that I think I'm good. I'm good now. I don't need any more of them. It's really one of those things where what seems to be daunting, today, will be easy in 2 months, just because the pace of things is so fast usually. So yeah.
Yeah, I find that actually quite empowering when I went out by myself. I didn't do it as early as you. Certainly, I think in a lot of ways that it was a disadvantage because I was quite set in a lot of my ways, as previous bosses wanted me to be. And then when you're by yourself all of a sudden, actually it's quite empowering because, you've got to do everything yourself for a little while, but also you can do everything yourself. You can learn these skills that you would never have had otherwise. And you can figure out, actually, a lot of them, they're not that scary once you figure out how to do it. And a couple of months later, it's just routine, isn't it? And can't believe I've ever struggled or was scared with that.
Yeah.
So that's part of the experience I kind of love, actually. And it still happens today, even 5 years later. There's something I'm struggling with right now, in fact, which I'm sure in 2 months' time I'll be fine with. But
exactly, yeah.
Yeah. And the human connections is, totally agree with you there. I mean, for everything. I mean, any human who's in business, unless you're a psychopath or something, you've got to value and depend upon those human connections.
Really? Yeah.
And I think with the context of the timing you were doing it as well, that's doubly interesting and important because of the COVID of it all.
COVID, but also I was so young that I had I didn't have the advantage that you had with the experience of human nature and sort of being able to discern certain behaviors, certain patterns. And so I fell on my face quite a few times with that. And it took a lot of time and energy out of what could have been a very productive few months or few weeks, to be honest. Yeah.
Yeah. But, they say the journey is as important as the destination, don't they? So, and I think sometimes that the past experiences, for me anyway, it could be a double-edged sword because sometimes it creates hang-ups and mindset issues that just slow you down or you get stuck when you shouldn't. So, it goes both ways.
True. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. How do you think those lessons are going to change what you do in the future? I mean, is there more entrepreneurial stuff in your future or?
Probably. Although,
Yeah.
to be fair, with this sort of me transitioning out of the project right now, it's a great relief. And I do want to take that time of not having that responsibility, that sort of weight on my shoulders for a little while. But I think eventually I might go back in. I think it's too exciting, too much fun not to.
Go back to the existing one or start something
No,
else?
start something new, I think. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, but no idea what that'll be yet,
No.
which is the fun of it.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so another question I'm going to ask you. I saw this description on your profile. You talk about being a cultural entrepreneur, which is not a phrase I've seen before. What does that mean to you, and how does that? I mean, what does that look like on the day to day?
So I think the distinction between cultural entrepreneur and entrepreneur is huge, simply because of the cultural world, the art world is such a different universe. There are certain rules, certain hierarchies that just, don't exist necessarily in the general entrepreneurial world. So culture as we know it is a field that is most often left unfunded in times of difficulty, in times of crisis. So it's really the field that's most often neglected when a nation or a society is experiencing difficulty, which we can actually see now as well. If you read the news, there's so many institutions, so many cultural institutions struggling and beginning to struggle. But if you think about it, art and culture are really what make a culture, right? A society is built upon certain historical, cultural, artistic tendencies, happenings, events. And so it's absolutely vital to society. And so for me, I believe that my job has been and is to really promote the culture and the arts, because society needs to have that creativity, that freedom of imagination. It cannot lose it, because if you take out art and culture from our societies, it's just dull, it's just grey. So I think that's really what I mean by that. It's just this sort of extra layer of advocacy and just having to push a little more, really.
Yeah, I think it's important as well, because the aspirational angle, because it's, I'm casting the net probably more broadly than you might when you talk about culture. So, pop culture as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It gives society something to aim for in a lot of ways, as well as that sort of the more gritty side of it, of things to avoid as well, which is always good to have both, I think. Yeah, and I think a lot of what you've said there about culture from a society point of view applies in organisations and businesses as well, especially when times are tough. It's something people don't tend to look at too hard. They try to ignore it.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting phenomenon. I quite like the description, at least from a organisational business sense, that culture is the way we do things around here. And I guess you could extrapolate that higher, couldn't you, to a social level?
Oh, sure.
I suppose that sort of is what it is. It's simple and easy to understand, which is why I like it, but there's probably a better definition out there.
I think that's pretty good, yeah.
Good. I can't remember who I heard it from. I think it was a former guest before Christmas. It might have been Scott. Anyway, yeah, he'll be cross with me if it wasn't, but never mind. Let's talk a bit more about leadership. We've touched on it a little bit already. I'm quite keen to hear your perspectives, given what you've done in your career, the kind of thing it was as well, because a non-profit is always really interesting to me as a comparison to the private sector. But also the time of your life that you were doing it is quite unusual or unique as well. I've not met many people who've started a business before they've graduated, for example. So from all of that so far, what would you say has been the biggest leadership lesson that you've learned?
I think the biggest lesson might also be the biggest challenge for founders and leaders. which is don't let your emotions dictate your decisions, your productivity, or your human relationships. So I think this is something I've struggled with, and I see leaders all around me struggle with constantly. This is just the, I guess, the curse of human nature is we feel a lot. What I mean here specifically is not, you don't need, you shouldn't take a break when maybe you feel too overwhelmed and you really just need that day off, and then you know that you can go back the next day and start fresh. It's more about balance. So when you feel like, okay, actually, I don't need to take that day off. I can just, I'll have a little cry. I'll still go. And maybe instead of 5 tasks, just do 3, but do them well, and then, reschedule those other 2. I think that's still a big win. And yes, I think emotions can really distract you, pull you off track. And especially when it comes to making decisions, you cannot let your emotions dictate that. You have to look at, first of all, reason, and what I mentioned before, which I think is huge, is intuition. So if you combine those 2, I think usually you have a pretty good turnout. But emotions, let's say, I don't know, there's a situation within your organization, and it's, it's a huge decision that you have to make. But the person on the other end of it, you might have a grudge that you hold against them because of something that they said, and whatever. You cannot let that interfere. Like that cannot be, even on your mind. So I think that's really important to learn. When it comes to human connections, I think that as a leader, that's probably one of the hardest things that I found, is you have to be everyone's rock. You're the leader, you're the head of this, you're the representative. So no matter how you're feeling on a given day, you have to put on a neutral face and you have to practice diplomacy. And I think there's only a select people that you can actually be honest with and show what you're actually feeling. At least maybe this is a very, rigid view, but this is what I found. I have a few, right hands, left hands who I know if I go to and whine and cry it out, they'll hold my hand, they'll give me a hug, and then I can actually share that with them because they're on an executive level, they understand what I'm going through. But maybe I wouldn't do that with someone who's an intern or, because it just throws them over and it makes them feel like, oh, this leader is actually not that strong. That's you don't want that. So yes, I think those are probably the greatest. That's the biggest lesson, I think, that this game of emotions thing that you have to master.
I mean, there's a lot of difficult and fine lines that I think we have to walk as leaders. Yeah. And one of those, potentially, it's the hardest one. It's the one that I've seen the most people struggle with, is that line between not letting your emotional responses impact your decision making, but also not denying the fact that you have emotions, because you're a human and leaders are human. And I think it's tied up in one of these massive, huge myths of leadership, isn't it? And I think you've actually touched on it already a little bit there. We put our leaders on a pedestal. We expect them to be perfect. And what happens then over time is that leaders come to expect that of themselves, and it's impossible to achieve. And so we get these whole things. And I'm convinced this is where things like imposter syndrome come from. Oh, yeah. It's certainly where low confidence comes from. It's where less rational, I won't say irrational, but less rational decisions tend to come from as well, because you're deciding based on the perception you want people to have of you as a leader, as opposed to what might be the right decision or what you actually are.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think another one of those fine lines I mentioned is this kind of this line between wanting to be perceived as a good, effective leader, strong, I think was the word you used. Not sure how I feel about the word strong, but anyway, in this context. And then that sort of the authenticity, vulnerability piece, which again, from your experience, you've just talked about there. And it is a difficult line to walk. And I think you're right. I mean, it's probably not appropriate to be completely vulnerable with an intern on their first day on the job, for example. But then there are sort of, I don't know, I sort of think of it as like circles of trust.
Yes.
And I think that goes both ways, though. So it's not so much about the intern's not worthy of the leader's trust yet. They're not in that inner circle, so they don't get it. It's in a lot of ways, it's the other way around. It's they don't know you, the leader, so they don't trust you enough for you to be sharing as much, if that makes sense. But yeah, I mean, they are such fine lines to walk, and I think that's why we all fall off them one way or the other so often.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it's a very delicate game of just human relationships, I suppose. Yeah.
I guess the real trick of it, with the emotion side of it at least, is being aware of it. Because again, and so the grudge is the classic one, isn't it? I mean, I've yet to meet a leader who would just flat out admit, yeah, I'm not giving them that because I've got a grudge against them because they did that last week and it really annoyed me.
Yeah.
So no promotion for them. Most of the time, they're either like internal or it's unconscious. It's a bias they don't know they have.
Yes,
and I think that the first,
that's not good. I think that self-awareness needs to be there, and I think this is actually a very good point. Therapy or any form of self-help, something where you are aware of your triggers, you're aware of your patterns, childhood stuff, all of that plays into being a leader. And I think I always used to say this, and I always say this: if you're not okay, how do you expect your organization to be okay?
Absolutely. I mean, that could apply to all sorts of things that we do as leaders, couldn't it? I mean, the first step, the first win has to be, like, as you say, self-awareness. And then, like, because, I mean, knowing it is one thing, but admitting it is something slightly different, isn't it? And then once you get to that point, then you've got to actually do something different. You've got to change the behavior. I think, I mean, lots of people get stuck at all three of those stages, I think. And a counterpoint to it, though, I think, which is also really important, particularly in this sort of emotional intelligence, empathy kind of sphere that we're talking about. Just because you're not good at one of those things doesn't make you a bad leader necessarily, and being a bad leader doesn't mean you're a bad person either. So that's another headcanon that we all live with, isn't it?
You can't do everything. You can't be everything. That's, everyone's good at something. Everyone's better at something. I know, for instance, for me, I'm a very empathetic, very kind leader, in the sense of, like, if someone's not feeling well, go home. I know a lot of leaders who would be like, you stay here. Don't take that time off. I'm just like, no, it's fine. I understand, so I'm very lenient on that front. I think, and, sometimes in the past, looking back, I should have been less lenient. I should have been less understanding, because there were certain things that needed to be done. And maybe that person was actually just faking it, or wasn't seeing through that, et cetera, et cetera. So there is a lot of that sort of self-awareness of, okay, actually.
I mean, you used the word lenient there. I would have used the word reasonable. Yeah. I mean, that you've spoken, I think, to the great fear that so many leaders and managers have, and that's why they react badly to people who are sick quite a lot, for example. I don't know. I think it's better to meet it with kindness.
For sure.
Do it with, like, in the moment, right now, you may suspect, you may be suspicious, it might just be in your nature to not trust that sort of thing. But until you know, you have to go with what the facts in front of you, and you've got to take people at face value on that sort of thing, 100%. And if you later find out that someone has been faking, well, fine, then then you can do something differently. You can take disciplinary measures or whatever. But so many managers and business owners I've worked for, who go like totally the wrong way on that, and all it does is destroy trust. And it's the same side of that page of the ones who, like, if you're off sick, they'll still phone you up and say, I know you're sick, but could you just
which is entirely
just
inappropriate.
no,
Yeah.
I'm sick.
Yeah.
Like, that's not how this works.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, and then the kindness thing. One final thing. 100% agree with you. I think that's the right approach. But the thing, again, that we forget too often is kindness needs to be applied to ourselves as well sometimes.
Yes.
Which, yeah.
Working on that.
ties through everything we've just talked about, I think, like the myths of leadership, that kind of the self-perception, the self-awareness, all of these things, I think. And you did talk about it a little bit, like if I'm having a bad day, I'll maybe do 3 things instead of 5, for example, when you were saying that. So that is self-kindness in a way. It's
been a process for me personally. I think what I would add to this as well is a lot of people misconstrue leadership as this glorified, like, I don't know, position of strength and power. And yes, you do have power, but actually that power is service. You're literally serving your team. A good leader isn't the one who's a tyrant and who's going to do everything to make sure that they're rich and they're powerful and whatever. A good leader is actually going to do everything to make sure that their team brings that they make sure that they bring out the best in their team. And so it's almost like a servitude towards the team and towards the cause. And so for that, I think a lot of the times we have to remind ourselves to actually, let's just take that day off. Yeah, let's just gift ourselves an afternoon off, just take a bath, whatever it is, chill, and not overwork ourselves. Yeah.
I'm a huge advocate of doing that. I think, particularly since I've been working for myself, I'm so much better at that. I used to be that person who just go in anyway, even when I'm sick. And I probably made loads of other people sick because of that. Because I took all the germs in with me. It was just like work through, power through. Stuff needs to get done. If I'm not there, I won't get it done, so I've got to do it. But actually, what that usually resulted in hindsight, I can now see, is being sick for longer. Whereas if I just took the day, I probably would have been fine again the next day. And and there's all the other people you might infect in the meantime. Yeah, I can't remember where I was going with that, but anyway. Yeah, I don't know. It's such an interesting area in terms of, like, academically, why so many people do it the wrong way, or what I think is the wrong way. And I still struggle with why that is these days. I think my current theory is it's just because it's that this is the way it's always been mentality. That's how I had to do it when I did this job. Therefore, yeah. And it's such a fallacy. Yeah. And quite a common question from leaders when I talk about this with them is, well, why should I? I'm running a business. It's not up to me to look after such and such's health. They just have to, if they're not well, they get a doctor's note. Otherwise, I want them here and I want the job done. That's all I care about. My answer to that usually is, okay, we're not going to work together anymore. No. But seriously though, it's like, the reason why you should care, I mean, you don't, brutally, honestly, you don't have to care as a leader. If you're happy with high turnover, unhappy staff, lower productivity than you might otherwise achieve, then you don't have to care. It's all good. If you can live with that as a leader, then that's fine. Best of luck to you.
Yeah.
But if you want all these things we've just been talking about, like deeper connections, longer term relationships, better productivity, happier people, empathy at work, which again goes both ways, trust, which goes both ways, respect, which goes both ways. If you want any of that, that's why we have to do it this way. We've probably just covered this, but what do you think is the mistake that's most common among new leaders in particular?
Lots. For me personally, I can't really speak for leaders in general. I think given as you said, my unique situation, I was still at school, at uni. I was very young. I didn't really have experience with people, with anything really. I tended to sort of went into this thinking, oh, I'm always honest and I always speak the truth and I always try to be nice to everyone. So I'm sure everyone else is the same. And so that was a disaster. Because I really wanted to take people at face value and really wanted to believe, everything they said. And a lot of the times I got into trouble. I hired people who turned out to be, I'm sorry to say, but snakes, and then I had to, there was conflict and there was drama and I had to fire them and all this stuff. And a lot of the times it was actually people who I thought were friends and then betrayed me. And then it was, oh my God, I think that I would try to avoid if I had to do it all over again. But safe to say that it was lessons for a lifetime. Yeah.
I don't know. Isn't it a happier way to live though than just like mistrusting everyone?
Yes. I think what was really interesting is after those situations happened, there were quite a few. And then I had this period of like, I don't trust it. Like, I'm just going to be as careful as possible. And I think now it's balanced itself out. I can sort of see certain patterns. I can notice if someone's saying things a certain way, and then I can, draw my conclusions and then not hire that person. But you still make mistakes. It recently happened to me, very recently, that we just, we had someone who was a chatty Cathy and persuaded us that they were going to be perfect for the role, hired them, complete disaster, had to save the day, caused me enormous stress, all this stuff. It happens.
Yeah. I mean, there's always going to be the outliers, aren't there? But I don't know. I usually describe myself as a bit of a cynic, but actually I think I'm quite optimistic when it comes to people. I think the vast majority of people are fundamentally honest.
Absolutely. Completely agreed. Yeah.
And on that basis, I think there's nothing wrong with taking people at face value. Like, I mean, with the caveat, as we talked about already, until you have evidence otherwise, at which point you change your behaviour. But yeah, I don't know. I'm not convinced you've done the wrong thing. I don't think it was a mistake.
Yeah. Maybe it wasn't a mistake. I think that you might be right. That might be the wrong word. I think it was definitely learning lessons. I learned so much during those times. But it still made me wary, and it still made me feel like I did lose quite a bit of time having to deal with those sometimes legal situations and not having enough time to build the organization itself. Yeah,
it is a difficult one. I think I don't know, it's personal preference, isn't it? I mean, for me, I would always rather err on the same side as you did, rather than, just not take anyone at face value and probably never achieve anything or trust anyone.
Absolutely. Yeah. There needs to be a good balance. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. What would you say has been your best experience of being led?
I can only name one instance. So I did the usual, before going to uni, the sort of summer jobs, internships, all this stuff. But my experience of being led, actually, it's a mentor of mine, Matthew, who has helped me over the past 2 years. We've been in touch, and he's a communications and marketing expert, and the way I remember I had these big questions for him, where I could not have even imagined the answer. And he just slowly but surely led me there, like over an hour, and then sort of presented the answer to me. And I was like, wow, he's so right. And that happens all the time, every single time we speak. And I think that's just so beautiful. It's this, he lets me figure it out on my own, but sort of masterfully brings me there. So I think that was a great experience, and that still continues to be a great experience. In terms of actually having a leader, like a boss or a manager, I don't really have experience in that. I think the last internship I did was 2 years ago. I was doing research for a historical institution, and so there wasn't much room for that there. Yes.
I've heard stories about the prevailing opinion in the academic world about leadership and management and how it's something to be avoided because it's not why we're here. I don't know if that's been your experience or if that's just an unfair generalization that I've heard.
I don't really know a lot about this. I didn't study like anything relating to leadership, like per se in academia. So, but I can imagine it in the sense of, I think in academia, we tend to really just focus on the knowledge itself and focus on the getting things done and the research instead of the how. So yeah, just focus on the on the motive rather than the method. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard things like leadership positions in universities. Academics don't want to do them, and it's almost like you have to be forced into it if you want to get funding for your next project, sort of thing.
Yeah. I'll have to see.
I was just curious.
I'll have to see.
Yeah.
I'll have to ask some.
I'm trying to widen my data set. Yeah. Yeah. Interesting though. So that mentor, I mean, you've described there almost word for word, like the benefit, the power, I guess, of coaching and the way that you just kind of get led through the breadcrumb of questions to finding your own answer.
And for them, it's so easy. It's just like they already know it, but they will spend that hour with you, explaining it, guiding you through it, and that's so lovely. That's really nice. Yeah.
Yeah, when it's done well, it's amazing, 100%. I do think it's a skill actually that all managers, all leaders should have. I know it's very fashionable these days to go and buy coaching from really expensive people who've had long careers doing other things. But I do feel like, and it's a useful thing internally. And I think, I don't know. I'm not sure how prevalent it is. Not as much as it should be, I suspect. Or there wouldn't be all these people selling it for thousands an hour, would there? So if you could go back in time, if that was possible, I might give you two questions for this one. But the first one is, how far in your own life would you travel and what would you say to your younger self?
Very personal question. So for those that know me well will know this, but for those who don't, it might be surprising. I actually grew up in a very harsh, very pressured environment. Maybe not as surprising considering I founded my own nonprofit organization at 20 years old. It must have come from somewhere. But yeah, there was a lot of pressure. There was lots of expectations. And nothing I sort of did was ever enough. And so that culminated when I was around 16, I want to say. And I began an 8-year-long depression, which was not pleasant. And I just remember the struggles that I went through, all the toxic friendships, relationships, all the bad stuff. And I think I would go back there and just actually urge myself to, first of all, calm myself and tell younger Emma that everything will be fine, and that the lessons coming out of this will be it will be worthwhile. But also urge her to go to therapy and to go and actually love herself a little more, and not be so hard on herself. Yeah.
Well, fair enough. Thanks for sharing that one. I didn't mean it to be so personal.
No,
but it's I think it is a good lesson though, isn't it? Just for everyone. I think most people who get this question, it's a variation on that answer, but perhaps not with the same context.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. And so given your area of expertise and everything you've done so far, I'm going to give you the extra question as well, which is remove the bit in your own lifetime. So if you could travel back in time, where would you go and when?
If I could travel back in time, where would I go? Absolutely early modern period. My God, the 17th century, probably London. I would start in London. No, I would start in Prague and then go to London. And just try and meet as many alchemists and witches as possible.
Yeah. Alchemy's always been fascinating to me as well. It always feels a bit like that old truism about any knowledge or skill appears as magic until you understand it.
Absolutely.
And I wonder if like that's what alchemy was. They were just really scientists who were way ahead of their time.
I think my argument has always been alchemy is the predecessor of science. And I firmly believe in that, just because of the way that it combined this material knowledge in all fields. So not just, which would eventually become chemistry, but also in, making pigments, so art, and experimenting in workshops. There was actually a very famous workshop in Florence at the Medici's, where they would experiment, alchemists with artists together. It was called a laboratory. It was brilliant. So all that stuff, I think it's really fascinating.
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. I always wonder as well, like, are there lost skills? Did they discover anything that we don't have today? No way of knowing, is there?
Yeah.
But it's the what if.
Yeah.
I love it. Could they actually turn like lead into gold? Who knows?
Some people claim they did.
Yeah, I'm sure some people do. Yeah. I feel like that one though, like if that were true, I don't think that would have become a lost skill. I think, they'd still be doing it today. They would be the modern billionaires.
I think if they actually managed, it's probably a very well kept secret.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Hopefully the Illuminati won't come for us now we've said that.
Leadership Heroes.
Well, Emma, it's been great talking with you. I've only got one question left. It's my favourite question, though, so no pressure. It's called Leadership Heroes. So if you had to pick one person, it has to be one person, although I'm a bit lenient about that, if I'm honest. But it could be anyone, literally anyone. So alive, dead, past, present, real, fictitious, if you like. This person should be someone who, in your opinion, perfectly embodies leadership. So who would that be and why?
I actually would go with alive, and a very famous entrepreneur based in London, Grace Beverley. I don't know if you've heard of her, but she founded the clothing company Tala, and some other companies as well. I think that, she came out of Oxford. I think we were at the same age, so right around the time I did. And she already founded Tala at Oxford, and then just kept on going, and now she's got multi-million businesses. And I think the way that she set up her systems and her structures, what she often talks about, she's got these weekly, semi bi-weekly, I don't even know how often they come out, but vlogs. And she often sort of shares her struggles with us, her viewers. And she's like, guys, like, I don't know how to make, I've never built a startup that's founder independent. So her projects are very much founder dependent, but I think the systems and the structures she set up are so brilliant. And they're not just productive, but ultimately they seem to be very great for also her employees. I think it's really wonderful what she did, and she does a lot for women's stuff, really, in entrepreneurship and advancing women's position in that field. So yeah, I think she's great.
I confess I don't know much about her, so I think I've heard of the company, but yeah, it's not really my area of interest, unfortunately. But I will look into her though, because I'd like to know more about anyone who's chosen in this question. So excellent. Well, Emma, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a lovely conversation. One small thing extra that I will ask you, if anyone in the audience would like to know more about you or the non-profit or any of your other work, where can they go to find out more?
I've got all my links up, I think, where you can see it, but I have a website, which is emmagabor.com. So just go there. You'll find a bunch of things. You'll find contact info, everything. You can also find me on LinkedIn, Instagram, as well as my non-profit. So
Okay, and I'll put a selection of links in the show notes for everyone as well.
So, thank you so much for having me. This was really fun. I really enjoyed it.
I've enjoyed it as well. And yeah, thanks for being here. It's been great.
Thank you.
Emma, thank you again so much for your time today. Great conversation. And I could have spent easily another hour talking about the history side of that with you. Perhaps we will do that one day in the future. And to everyone in the audience, thank you for joining us again today. And I hope there were some useful and practical tips that you've taken away from that conversation. If you would like to learn more about Emma, what she does, how to contact her, do check those links in the episode description, in the show notes. Click on the things, learn the stuff, as I always say. If you are in a moment of transition in your own leadership journey right now, if you're facing change, if you've taken on new roles, new responsibilities, or if you're doing leadership in practice for the first time in your career, whatever point of that career you are at, and you're facing some of those challenges that have been talked about today or others besides, do reach out. Come and find me. You will find my LinkedIn profile also in the show notes. Come and join us at the Integrity Leaders community. Again, link is in the chat. I'm here to help. The community is here to offer you support as well. So do come along and join us. It's a monthly membership, £39 a month. No obligation. It's a rolling fee, so you can cancel any time. No minimum contracts or anything like that. So come along, try it out, see what you think. I'm confident you'll get some benefits, some leadership knowledge from it as well. Might even meet a few new contacts and have that opportunity to network with other business owners, other new leaders like you. So as I say, link is in the chat. Hit that green button when you get to that website. It's www.leadingwithintegrity.co.uk. And as a podcast listener / viewer, you can also benefit from the discount code that's hopefully flashing on the screen somewhere around my face right now if you're watching it, but it is in the show notes as well. And that will give you 50% off your membership fee forever, for as long as you stay a member. Can't say fairer than that. So I hope to see you there. That's all I've got time for today. Thank you again so much for being with us, and do join me again next week. Until then, stay safe, keep practicing at that leadership alchemy, and remember, be a leader, not a boss.